This conference will now be recorded.
Thank you for joining the City of Kingston's Common Council at our Finance and Audit meeting. Today is Wednesday, May 13th. My name is Andrea Schott, the Council President and organizer for our virtual meetings. Before we begin our meeting, we would like to go over a few meeting guidelines to help us navigate the system as efficiently and respectfully as possible. We ask that members of the public and press remain muted and off camera for the length of the meeting. As organizer, I reserve the right to mute anyone who unmutes themselves. Council members and city staff will control their own mute button. Good practice would be to mute yourself if you are not speaking to avoid background noise and feedback. If a council member or staff wishes to speak, they will raise their hands. The chairperson will call on them before they speak by stating their name clearly for our audio listeners. All of our meetings are recorded. Both video and written transcriptions will be made available to the public on the city's website at a later date. Although we will not have public speaking tonight, you could submit written comments to the City of Kingston Clerk, Elisa Tinty, at emtinty@kingston-ny.gov, or by dropping them off at the drop box located outside the side door of City Hall. We also encourage you to reach out to committee chairs or your ward's representative at any time. If you have any audio issues, send a text message to the following number, 845-594-6120. I'll repeat this number again, but be aware that phone calls will not be received during the meeting. The number to text is 845-594-6120. As the organizer for today's meeting, I reserve the right to lock and pause the meeting to eject anyone who has behaved inappropriately. Lastly, at tonight's meeting, we have in attendance Chairman Doug Koop, committee members Alderman Rennie Scott Childress, Alderman Tony Davis, Alderman Steve Shavit, and Alderwoman Michelle Hirsch. Non-voting council members, we have Alderman Jeffrey Ventura Morel. City staff, we have City Clerk Elisa Tinty, Grants Manager, Director Kristen Wilson, City Engineer John Schulteis, Corp Counsel Kevin Bryant, Comptroller John Toohey, Mayor Steve Noble. And that's it. Thank you for your patience during these difficult times. And on behalf of the Common Council, I wish you and your family good health. I now turn the floor over to Chairman Koop.
Thank you, President Schott. We have an agenda tonight with about 7 items culminating in 6 items of business, but culminating in the 7th item, which the standard monthly finance update by Comptroller John Toohey. First on the agenda is the economic impact plan. Goes back to the letter from Mayor Noble from May 1 of this year. Mr. Mayor, you want to describe this plan to us now and what you're asking for in the committee report, along with Controller Toohey.
Sure. Thank you, Doug. I appreciate the time tonight to be able to address the Finance Committee. As we all know, we've been going through, so much with this virus, not only the health effects and the effects that it's had on our community, but also the personal and more global toll on our businesses and our workplaces. This toll also has had its effect on city government and the ability for us to raise revenues to fund our operations. As you all know, sales tax and some of our other major revenue sources are a large part of the budget, second only to actual property tax revenue. So over $14 million on an annual basis helps to fund from sales tax all of the great work that our city staff that are able to do each year. With this downturn in our business economy, we clearly have suffered and are suffering with a reduction in sales tax. And so with that, we have created a plan that we believe will help reduce those impacts while we recognize that without major federal support, we won't be able to completely blunt those impacts. However, we're trying to do our best without, because we're not sure whether that federal support is going to come. And so we have to do our due diligence and to plan for the worst, but hope for the best. I think that this economic plan will do that. We've laid out a couple of different scenarios. Three different estimates of based on our projections of basically 2 weeks ago on May 1st of what we would be encountering, both a low loss, a kind of a medium loss, and then a high loss. As John can express a little bit later in this conversation, we are at this point already trending toward the high loss estimate, which would be that $5 million mark. We may actually, depending on how the next few revenue kind of sources coming in with sales tax checks and others we could be over that high loss. And so this is a serious issue, and it's serious for our community like it is for many communities around the Hudson Valley and New York State. So this plan, not only does it lay out what our potential estimated losses are, it also lays out what we can do about it. And so I worked with our department heads to come up with ways that we would be able to immediately cut expenses. And so that is before you this evening. We believe that we could cut both between contracted expenses and other kind of expense lines in city budget. We would be able to go ahead and actually, shave off $829,550.33 in spending. That would be in areas of, everything from overtime to, costs related to equipment and maintenance of equipment and maintenance of buildings. So included in the packet is an actual detailed breakdown of every single line and what the revenue or what the expense cut would be to that line. We would then also not fill a number of currently vacant positions, which would also save an additional $782,000, give or take. And that would allow us to, total a 1.6 million savings in our current budget immediately upon ratification by your committee and the full council. And then, we had created a second and third phase, what we called phase 2 and phase 3. Phase 2 we've been working on already, which would be to implement a series of temporary layoffs through July 31st. There are many areas of city government that have been negatively impacted that we haven't been able to have our staff fully working in, as well as other staff that have been identified that we believe could be temporarily laid off during this time. We've worked with the union to be able to put an agreement together in place, which we signed today, that would allow us to begin identifying positions, informing those employees, and starting a process, which we hope could start as early as next week for some employees. This is a kind of a stopgap measure because of the unemployment benefits that are provided to these employees, both at the federal and state level. Most of these, all of these employees would be kind of whole still and would not lose any salary, basically any income, because they would be able to still receive all of these unemployment benefits. But this would expire by July 31st, which will then, by then, we'll have a much better sense of how the economic picture is shaping up for the city of Kingston. John will have many weeks of sales tax data. We will also have a better sense of revenue. We'll also have a better sense of when we would be able to start to really be fully opened for business, and then what that would look like. Are people still going to shop or not? And there's so many unknowns. Will we be able to have mass gatherings? Will we not? And so one of the things that we want to be able to do, and while it is completely devastating to think about, is that we do have to at this point seriously consider also retirement incentives to be able to get folks to retire so that we could save additional expenses. And then at last resort, if we have to, permanent layoffs. And so that is our plan. That is kind of the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. I look forward to continuing to, work with the council and as John will do tonight, to continue to keep you updated as we continue to get the numbers in. One of the things that, is just really, trying is, so today John received what would be our second sales tax check. Last week, we received our first for the period during this pandemic. That one kind of few week period was down 27% from the same time last year. The check that we received today, again, during this pandemic period, was down 38% from the same time last year. And so these are obviously major drops. We obviously, we can see that in the community with all of the businesses that are shuttered. But I think it does bring home to us the reality of the situation we're facing and how dire it is for local governments like ours to be able to continue to move ahead. And without any federal support, our services that we provide on a daily basis are going to be impacted greatly. And I think that, again, anything that we can do to continue to send that message to, Congress and our representatives is helpful. But for now, though, we have to deal with what's in reality and what's right in front of us. And that's our own very, well-crafted city budget that is now going to be running at a deficit. And so we need to do our best to correct that. And so that's my plan, and that's the overview of that plan. I hope that that was okay, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is Chairman Doug Coop. For the moment, although you're pretty far into looking ahead into phase 2, but for the moment, my understanding is you're only asking for approval for the reductions associated with phase 1, the $829,550. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. All right. It is a little disturbing, and not that you have any control over it, but it appears that we may be going into phase 2 maybe a little bit sooner than everyone had expected on the basis of the reduction in sales taxes that we've seen and are projecting in John's memos earlier today. But that's something we will deal with as we need to deal with it in the future days. But for now, we're only looking for, you're asking us to approve a committee report which will allow a reduction in general spending, overtime, and snow and ice, and the Rundown Neighborhood Center of $829,550. Correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Are there any other questions or comments, please? Alderman Tony Davis, please.
Alderman Tony Davis here. So, and Steve and John, we're in phase 1, which means that if I'm reading this and information that we received, that means we're not going to fill any vacant positions. Is that part of phase 1?
Correct.
Alrighty. So my thing is, and my disappointment, I don't know if the word disappointment that, I'm hearing from constituents is, why did we hire a housing director to fill a position that was vacant, and now we're not going to fill these other positions? I think at this time we had a handle on it a while ago, that we knew that this economic impact, that we still went ahead, and not to say this position is not worthy, but at this time, and that could have saved the city a lot more money at this time, and without hiring that position and delaying it until we have a better control in, what our finances look like. So I'm trying to figure out, why did we still went ahead and that position was filled when we knew what our economic and financial status is probably going to be. Thank you.
Sure. So to answer your question, so when, if you think back to when in April, when you guys approved that position, just 4 weeks ago, we discussed at that time that, this is actually a grant funded position. We actually receive in the economic development budget almost $245,000 to fund 3 full-time positions in that department. And so a majority of that person's position is funded to be able to run the Kingston City Land Bank. And so, none of the positions that we are we are not backfilling that are listed in your committee report there, none of those are grant funded. And so, and many of them you'll see have also been vacant for quite some time. I think not only do we have grant funding for this position, but I think all of you at the council level, really recognize that during this pandemic, housing issues are going to be critical for us to be able to tackle. And so I think that, it's also important for us to be able to prioritize, the work that we're doing. And I think that that's one, key piece to also consider.
Alderman Shabbat. Steve, you're muted. Okay.
Still can't hear you, Steve.
And the
Steve
rest
cannot
of you,
hear
no
you.
one can hear you. Nobody can hear you, Steve. Am I correct?
Yes.
Your mic is open, but we can't hear you. Let's, for the moment, let's move
I
to,
just texted him a suggestion, so hopefully that should fix it.
let's move to Alderman Scott Childress, please. Steve, we'll try and come back to you.
Okay, it shows that it's working.
Oh, there you go.
Okay.
All right. Okay,
We're now back with Alderman Stephen Shabbat. Go ahead, Steve.
Okay, sorry, it said it was working. I don't know why it wasn't. Anyway, I'm pretty much echoing what Alderman Davis said. I've already heard from numerous people about filling this position. Now, my recollection at the meeting was that this was not, I know I asked this position whether it was grant funded. I thought you said the money was coming from unfilled positions. This is for you, Mayor. I thought when I left that meeting, I was under the impression that this position was filled with positions that were in the budget but not filled. So, but that it is with a grant.
We also eliminated a vacant position in that department to be able to help cut costs. And so you actually put money back into basically, into the contingency or fund balance. I don't know where we ended up putting it, but there was actually, there was a savings there by cutting that position. So we didn't want to just go to you and say, hey, let's add a new position, it's grant funded. We actually went to you and said, not only is there funding for this position, we also want to cut this other vacant position. You guys then chose not to move forward with hiring the other position that I wanted, at that time. And so that's why there was enough money in the budget to actually pay for both of those positions, but you guys chose to just fill one of them. And so even though we still cut the position. So not only is it grant funded, but we also have a savings from cutting that other vacant position, if that makes sense.
Okay, well, I mean, that certainly feels better that it's coming from grant money. I know we can't use that for any other positions. I'm kind of concerned when I saw the list that, we're not filling police vacancies, but we fill this. But if it's grant funded, then I understand that.
Alderman Scott Childress, please.
Yeah, on that same issue, Mayor Steve, I was wondering, can you tell us which grant that is and what percentage of the salary is funded by the grant?
I don't have that in front of me, but it's the Community Foundation of the Hudson Valley, the Land Bank grant that we received. And so if you look in the budget book there, you'll see,
Okay.
that big dollar value. I think it's over 200,000, I believe. And so it helps to fund, the positions of the housing rehab specialist, the director, as well as the administrative assistant in that department.
Great. And so a crucial thing, not only a crucial thing in hiring that position is not just that we're going to have a lot of housing issues that we've got to face, and we need somebody who can really be a point person on it. There's also the issue of transferring the city-owned properties to the land bank, which will bring money into into the fund, right? Into the general fund.
Yep, and it's putting more resources into the land bank. For the last year, as you all know, it's been run by our current community and economic development director, who obviously has lots of community development work to do already as a full-time job, and so it was definitely something that didn't move as fast as we all wanted. And so by putting dedicated resources toward it, we believe that we're going to be able to see much quicker results and be able to get some of these houses back onto the property tax rolls, and really, most importantly, back into the hands of Kingston families who have been looking for an affordable place to live.
Great, thank you.
Alderwoman Michelle Hirsch, please.
Yes, this is Alderwoman Michelle Hirsch. Thank you, Chairman. Mayor Noble, I'm just curious to know for phase 2 and 3, would we be able to put back the 2 vacant police hires? Is that a possibility? I'm just concerned, with the crime that has gone up with the COVID-19 pandemic, domestic violence, overdoses, things of that nature. And I'm just concerned about leaving our police department short.
One of the things that I'll mention is that, because of, this pandemic, I didn't want to, and because of that same concern, I'm not asking you to remove those positions from the budget. They can be filled at any time still. The amount of cost savings we have would go down. But one thing that I will mention about the current police department and dealing with this pandemic, with school not in operation and school not being open since March, we have 3 SRO officers that have now been able to join the regular force and normally are not accessible to us because they're in schools all day. They're now available and accessible to help when needed. And so the 2 vacancies that have existed down there since March and the one that just happened since 2 weeks ago or a week ago, we have not seen any real decrease in ability of the police department because we actually have those 3, and we generally have often run 2 police officers down between the hiring process and getting folks up. It's very seldom that we've been able to be at the full staffing contingent, just because we do have retirees, and depending on the list and whether or not people have police training, it often takes a while to get these officers up and running anyway. And so with at this point, the chief is confident that we're not going to see any issues. If we notice a change, and the chief comes to me and says, we need to get these positions hired, then we'll see. But I do have to, we have to recognize that if it's currently working okay and everything is, we are looking at potentially a $3 to $4 million deficit. And so is it easier to not fill a vacant position when we know a department is doing as best they can with it, or do we want to start laying off employees and cutting benefits? And these are some of the hard decisions that we're going to make. And unfortunately, the vacant positions are the easiest place to start. But we, at least by leaving them in the budget, you're allowing us the ability and flexibility that if for some reason we need to fill them immediately, we can start that process.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. This is Chairman Doug Coop. I now recognize Alderman Shabbat.
Thanks, Doug. Steve Shabbat. Actually, this is kind of a 2-part question for the mayor. One of the items in phase 1 was and I'm quoting, limiting overtime pay across city departments. Is there a specific plan for that with some guidelines? I mean, that's a pretty generic phrase. I'm just wondering whether you're going to come up with some guidelines for department heads to use before, taking away overtime or granting overtime. And are we going to see that phase of the plan? I'd be interested to see the details of how we're going to limit overtime. And, moving forward, hopefully we won't get to this point, but, we're looking at furloughs at some point, unless this clears up. Of course, I can't quite understand, if we're going to be furloughing employees, how we're going to, provide services as we need without some overtime. So, I'm presuming that's going to be part of the criteria also.
Yes, and so in that budget packet, and it's buried in there, but there is an entire sheet related to overtime. And so what we did was we basically cut most departments, John, I think it was 30% generally on overtime from each department that we could. And police and fire, I think we cut less than that because we recognize that their overtime is needed much more than some other places. And so we basically, now that, when the Common Council makes these budget transfers, the department heads will now have less overtime money to use. And so they will have to use that as a tool for them to be able to then make the appropriate decisions as to what is worthy of overtime and what is not. For those that can take comp time, that is another opportunity. And so department heads have been encouraged to also use comp time for their employees instead of overtime. But again, as we do now, department heads are limited by their budget for overtime. And so by cutting their budget and their overtime accounts, we're limiting, and it will really be up to them to then prioritize how much overtime they can dole out and under what circumstances. And again, we don't really micromanage that process. But by cutting their budget, that does, limit clearly what they can do with it.
Okay, but at this time, it's the department has discretion when to use it.
Yes, but
The amount of money they have.
Just determine the amount. Like, so tonight we're cutting the amount that they have. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Chairman Coop now recognizes Alderman Tony Davis.
Alderman Tony Davis here, and two questions, Steve, John. One, in regard to phase two, and how are these temporary layoffs going to be? Last hired, first laid off, and secondly off, and since this economic crisis, and I'm assuming it has been, and should it be that the city cuts any unnecessary spending in regard to resolutions that we might have already passed, not knowing, how long this epidemic was going to go? Has that been discussed? Should we be discussing that, of putting a freeze on any unnecessary spending at this time?
So I think we'll take your first part of your question first. I think in general, well, I'll take the second part first. So with the freeze and spending, I mean, I think what we've tried to do is we've told all of the departments that one, obviously we're cutting their budget in a way that we think that is really limiting the ability to have kind of non-discretionary expenses because or non-essential expenses, because we are taking some pretty deep cuts to some of the lines that they use the most often. We also have told the departments that in order to spend anything over $1,000, they need to be able to, John reviews that directly to be able to make sure that expense is kind of something that is important, if you will, and is in the budget and is available. We also, for any purchase or any equipment purchase or anything that is being purchased from a bond that was even previously authorized, the department heads need to submit in writing why that is a necessary purchase. And then John and I need to approve that before those can be made. And so in essence, we really have implemented, kind of all of the key components of a spending freeze. And I think that our department heads recognize that, this is a very critical time. I meet with them often, and I think that they all recognize that, everything that they can do to save in costs now will be further, kind of reductions in the amount of harm that would occur with layoffs, right? So the more you can save on a contracted services line is the less likely then that you may have layoffs in your department. And so I think that they recognize that and are working toward that goal. And when I think kind of going back to your first question, related to, kind of what we would consider temporary layoffs, that is something that, we are and have negotiated with the union. It basically lays out the time period. So it would be through July 31st. It lays out the rights that the employees would have. But one of the things about it, this temporary layoff, because of the nature of it, and because they basically it's an unpaid leave of absence. Seniority, often would get waived for employees that decide to participate, and so there really isn't any bumping that would be occurring with this, compared to a permanent layoff where people then have bumping rights and retreat rights to different positions that they may have previously had within city government. And so we won't see any bumping, at least that we're aware of, in this case of this temporary layoff.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Are there any other questions, comments? I think we can then probably move to the question, which is in the committee report, which reads from the mayor's office to reduce the general fund budget in the amount of $829,550.33 in spending, as has been delineated in general spending, overtime, and snow and ice, and some things at the Rundout Neighborhood Center. Is there a motion to proceed on this? Motion by
Doug?
motion by Alderman Scott Childers. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Alderman Davis, correct?
Shellhurst.
Okay, all in favor? Please show thumbs up.
Aye.
Let's see, I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Opposed? 0. Okay, the motion passes. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Chairman Coop, I don't know if I'm going to be able to be on the whole call. And so I know that there may have been some questions related to some of our COVID-19 emergency procurements. I think that ended up being put at the end of the agenda. I don't know if anyone has any specific questions on that they would like to go over with me while I'm here. I'll try to hang out a little bit longer on the call, but if I get pulled away, I just didn't know if anyone has any questions on that, I'd be happy to answer.
I do.
Yeah,
I do.
okay, Rennie Scott Childers, please.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I appreciate the efforts you've put in. I think it's been quite amazing, the volunteer response that we've had and the way that different community groups in the city have worked together. But I'm wondering, I see that I believe it's the meal preparation is going to be ending fairly soon, while grocery distribution will continue. And I'm just wondering, what's the reasoning behind ending the meal distribution?
Sure. So, we've been working collaboratively with a group of organizations here in Kingston, with the Kingston Food, Emergency Collaborative, or Emergency Food Collaborative, which has really also been majorly supported by Project Resilience. So Project Resilience is a county-funded initiative. They paid restaurants for meals. And the county decided that they were going to be moving into what they called phase 2 of Project Resilience, starting at the end of this week. So basically starting on Monday of next week. They have, decided to change gears with their plan. I mean, of course, all of their funding was raised privately through donations. And so eventually they don't have an endless source of funding for those restaurant meals. And so what they're trying to do is move folks onto currently existing programs. So programs like Meals on Wheels, other types of food-based programs like grocery delivery. So the county is working with them through Department of Social Services to see what types of meal programs our families need, and then getting them signed up mostly for groceries. We're trying to move everyone toward groceries. And so now Project Resilience is supporting, similar to what we did for the first few months, Project Resilience is now helping to fund places like People's Place and others. So kind of transitioning the funding that they were spending on meals, which was a much higher dollar value, to now funding it to kind of families with groceries to further supplement what People's Place, and they're doing that across the county. And so we have been obviously a huge part of their Kingston operation because we've provided all of the volunteers and clearly a large amount of the preps work and services to do this emergency food delivery. But I think that the whole collaborative and the county all agree that it's time to move folks onto some of these more permanent kind of social services support systems, especially now that many people have started to get kind of caught up with their unemployment finally has started to kind of get rolling now, and the stimulus checks started to come out. For the first 8 to 12 weeks of this, there really were no support systems in place at all for our most at risk. And so we stepped in to fill that need, but we think that we're now ready to, there are support systems in place to keep folks fed and, healthy.
Great. And then in terms of housing, what kind of data, stories, issues have you heard about in terms of people losing their housing or being in danger of losing their housing?
I think that the governor's eviction moratorium being extended through mid-August is a good thing, and that is helping to keep our families stable right now so that there are people not getting evicted and moved around from place to place. We are still getting calls to our Office of Landlords who are having proposed rent increases going into effect as of April 1st. We had some of those, and each month we're getting some of those calls. In general, though, we have not heard any, terrible stories as of yet. But we do believe that has been delayed until August because we recognize that it's been a tough time for both our landlords and our tenants. And so, we are hopeful that, as we did a community development call for proposals. The community development office right now is going through those proposals, making sure that they meet all of the applicable standards. We'll be able to get those all out to you. But my hope is that there's an applicant in there that's proposing to do housing-based assistance to be able to provide folks with some of the resources they need so that they don't lose their housing. So that's kind of the update on the housing front that I could give at this point.
Right, that's exactly what I was thinking about. And our dilemma there, though, is trying to figure out, so suppose we do have a very good proposal relating to keeping people in their houses. It's going to be difficult, it seems like, to figure out what's the actual amount of money, what percentage of that CARES money should go to the housing issue. It's going to be very different if there's 5 families that are seriously affected versus 50 or 150.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think that, obviously having the unemployment insurance through July 31st, helping that is helping keep our families in these places because people who have lost their full-time employment. But it has been very difficult for people to get through on unemployment, and many people are still waiting for unemployment. And so hopefully this will all line up so that our fund will be able to help the most in need, and not just folks who have kind of waiting for their unemployment check, who will eventually come. But there are many people that are falling through the unemployment system based on the type of work that they do, or and so there are lots of issues, but I do think that the Community Development Committee of the council, I'm going to provide recommendations, but you guys are going to have your work cut out for you to try to figure out the best mix that best serves our community.
Thank you.
This is Chairman Coop. Alderman Davis, did you have a question or a comment?
Yes, I did. And Steve, you might have answered for me. So these are emergency procurements. And if I got it right, and we're phasing out of that. And my question earlier today when I received these figures was, why were we paying $12,000 to the YMCA for a location? I didn't understand if the food was going to People's Place, and why could we have not utilized that location? And so is that part of this phasing out now?
Sure, yeah, I can just explain that real quick. So People's Place has been kind of pretty much from day one doing groceries for families. They're for about 400 families a week. But at the YMCA, that is where we created the distribution hub for basically the hot prepared meals. And so out of the YMCA parking lot and their lobby, we were serving 3,000 meals a day for twice a day. So basically 1,500 in the morning, 1,500 in the afternoon of meals. So basically restaurants would bring them to us, they would get delivered. We would have our volunteers get there, sort them all out by address and region of the city. They would then get dispersed and then carted out. So we've purchased and have rented tents from Save On up through this upcoming Friday for both People's Place and for there. But the biggest need at the Y was one of the reasons why we worked with them was that they actually had a walk-in cooler actually down on the ground level that we utilized for them, that they turned on for us, and that we were able to get started using right away. But that we quickly outgrew that, and so we actually had to rent 2 portable cooling trailers to be able to cool and keep cool all of this food that we were getting from restaurants before we could deliver. And so we had to plug all of those in. They were all electric-based coolers. And so the electricity bill at the YMCA flew through the roof, as well as their staff time to keep the building open, because of course the YMCA was closed during this pandemic. So they opened up for us. And so that basically $1,000 a week covered all of their staff time, all of the utilities, the use of their building, going in and out of their building. And so that was only though for the amount of weeks that we have it. We started at the end of March. And we'll go through this Friday, and then that contract will end. I don't think we'll spend the whole 12,000, but we at least that's what we thought. We thought we would go through early June, so we may save a little bit there. But with all of these expenses, because they're all related to emergency food and emergency communications, and we're working right now with Kristen's office, and she can talk a little bit about it if anyone has more specific questions. But we're hopeful that all of these emergency procurements will be able to be reimbursed by FEMA. As part of our application for, the disaster aid. So we do hope to get all of that 163,000 plus back. And there's still more coming. There may be other expenses that other departments had from police and fire and DPW that we haven't even accumulated. These are all just the ones that went through my office. So we expect to do a FEMA reimbursement. So that's just something to keep in mind too as we go.
Alrighty, thank you. I appreciate the clarification of exactly what was being done at various locations, because you just see the 12,000 and I didn't really have a full understanding, but I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman Cooper, that was a good question, Tony Davis. Thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
Let's move on in the on the agenda. Without any objection, I'd like to move to item 3 because Kristen Wilson and Ruth Ann Devitt Frank have been waiting patiently. Without objection, I'd like to move to the grant management update. So Kristen, do you want to proceed on this? And Ruth Ann?
Sure. Andrea, if you can give my KW profile the ability to.
Yeah, just give me a second, Kristen.
Okay. It's the one with the phone next to my name.
It doesn't have the phone next to it, so I think that's the correct one. Let me know if it doesn't work.
Yeah, I think it's coming up. There we go. That was the next
Beautiful.
agenda. Okay, so I had planned for tonight to do a presentation just in general about our grants management office. Some of this information is going to be completely elementary for some of you, and for others, it may be there. You might learn something new. But I just wanted to do a general overview of what my office does, and kind of some of the key points about grants, things that I've heard, out there in the public, or just in general, some misunderstandings about grants. So I wanted to share that with you, and then I'll go into the grants activity update and share about the specific projects. So everybody can see my screen okay?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, you're good, Kristen.
Okay, great. So our office was created in 2016 to secure and manage funding for public infrastructure projects and public service programs that improve the quality of life for Kingston residents. So we work with all of the departments across the city, or nearly all of the departments across the city, to apply for and manage grants. The three people who are in our office now working on grants management are myself, Ruth Ann, Devitt Frank, who's on the call, and Pat Massa, who some of you may have not met, but he is housed in the comptroller's office, and he's the man who goes and gets all of our reimbursements. So he's very, very important to our work. So as I mentioned, we coordinate with other departments to apply for and manage grants. I think one misunderstanding that happened when I first came on as grants manager back in 2016 was the idea that I would be managing every single grant across the city. And as you look at our grants portfolio and the documents that I sent you yesterday and today, we have 65 grants, and it's just would be humanly impossible for one person to manage all of those and every single process that happens within them. So we have a project manager identified for each grant, and that's usually a city staff member housed in a specific department who has knowledge in the content area. So for example, the engineering office would manage water infrastructure or street infrastructure grants. The Parks Department would manage a parks grant. So we have generally been moving in that direction of having the project manager housed in the department where the program's happening. Although there are some grants that Ruth Ann and I manage. So I manage a number of street project grants. Ruth Ann helps a lot with arts grants. She's managing the Dietz project. So one of the things about project managers is that while it is good to have the person housed in the department, it's also important for that person to have general project management skills. And that's something that both Ruth Ann and I have, and is important to making sure that projects happen. We also partner with local nonprofit organizations and businesses to submit grant applications in partnership to benefit the community. And then also the next thing I wanted to talk about is just how grants work. There is a pre-award process and a post-award process. And I think a lot of times people think about the post-award process and all of the activities that need to happen during that time, but the pre-award is also very important as well. And so in my office, we do the lion's share of writing proposals and developing budgets. However, we work very closely with departments, and sometimes staff members in other departments write proposals, especially if they have a lot of knowledge in the content area. All of the proposals that go in through my office or with the awareness of my office and also the mayor. If we are awarded the grant, then we will negotiate a contract with the state agency or the foundation or the federal agency. And then we get into post-award, and that is when usually there's some sort of vendor RFP, so a request for proposals, when we look for a subconsultant or a contractor to do the work. So that's a big portion of what we do. And then most of the grants that we have are reimbursements. And so we have to manage tracking all of the expenses and then submitting reimbursements to state agencies or foundations. And just gonna offer Ruth Ann a moment to ask something or say something if she'd like to. Did you have anything to add, Ruth Ann?
I think Tony Davis had a question earlier. Did you want to ask that question?
Yes, this is Tony Davis here. I was wanting this, and Kristen, thanks for clarification. And because as you know, and I've heard, and you, like you mentioned earlier, that you've heard people out in the community in regard to project managers and why, and somebody might be a project manager and not this person. So I'm glad that you explained that you know, many of these projects have different project managers depending on the scope of the project and what department that might fall in it. Thank you.
Yeah, and also sometimes there are, Ruth Ann and I do manage a number of projects, and there are project management skills that are not necessarily content related. It's more process related. So what I mean by that is Ruth Ann and I know how to put together an RFP. Ruth Ann and I know how to, you know, move a project forward, communicate with the state agencies, communicate with vendors. So there's a lot of, I guess you might call them soft skills that a project manager needs to have. And it's a skill set that I think is gained through experience in project management. And a lot of our project managers, obviously in the departments, have that skill set too. But it's not a skill set that is necessarily easy to have. You know, anybody who's done project management knows that there can be a lot of challenges. So if anybody else has questions, Andrea, will you let me know, because I can't see everybody.
Yeah, I can't see everybody either, so I will, if I don't see a hand go up and you're not being answered, just send me a text message. All right.
Okay. Great. I'm happy to answer questions as we go along. So just, I wanted to share some keynotes. There's so many aspects to grant project management, but I just wanted to share a couple of notes about how we do things. The file structure, we have a share drive where all of the grants that are at the city or the city has been awarded are housed on the grants management share drive, so that Ruth Ann and I and Pat especially, since he's managing most of the finances, have access to everything. And the file structure really reflects the last slide. It reflects how we go through this grant cycle. So you can see number one is application, then we have approvals, grantor contract documents, RFPs, then vendors, and so forth. So just wanted to share a little bit about that. I think many of you know this, but I think a lot of folks out in the public do not know this. Funding sources are geared for specific activities that are of interest to the funder. So, for example, if we get a grant from the Department of Environmental Conservation, it's probably for an environmental program, and it's only can be spent on that purpose. So I think sometimes I've seen folks say, well, why don't we spend the grant on this instead? Well, we can't. We can only spend grant funding on the project that the application was put in for. So it can't be reallocated to a different project after the award has made. I think most of you understand that, but I wanted to share that. Staff time on grants, I think, has been a source of sort of mysteriousness and how it works. So grants can be used to fund all or part of a city staff's salary. And for the percentage of funding that a staff member has allocated to their salary must be for time that they work on the grant. And for most agencies, not all of them, sometimes foundations don't require this, but most state and federal agencies require a very specific log of grant tasks, when they were done, what time of the day they were done, what date they were done on. And so you can see over on the side here, this is an example of one of my logs. I use a software called Clockify. And so any time that is spent on a grant, it needs to be very meticulously logged for both grant funding and match funding. Volunteer time can also be used for a match on a project, but a volunteer would have to log their time in a very similar manner. So I just wanted to share that with folks. As I mentioned before, most of the grants that we received are reimbursement programs. And so the city must provide all of the records, the expenditures of funds, and the proof of the expenditures with a reimbursement request to the agency. And we are also required to do a lot of reporting. All of the agencies have different reporting requirements. Some of it is quarterly, some of it is each 6 months, some of it is once a year. And so that's something that's required. We also do a lot of MWBE reporting. So for example, when we win a grant for a transportation project, depending on the funding agency, they might require that we spend 30% of that grant on it, minority, women, or business enterprise. And so we have to track how all those funds are being spent and how they're being allocated to MWBEs. So that's another aspect of grant funding. And I just wanted to share about priorities for our office now. We, as the mayor mentioned earlier, we're working on applications to FEMA for COVID relief funding. We're also putting in a grant for to FEMA for another round of SAFER funds for our firefighters in hopes that we can keep our firefighting staff at the levels that they're at. We're continuing to do research for COVID relief funding, other opportunities for COVID. And we're working on an application in partnership with other community organizations for the Emergency Food Coalition. I'm going to actually invite Ruth Ann to say more about that if she'd like to.
I'll just add that I've seen a number of different possibilities come our way through grant opportunity alerts. And I've been looking into them and speaking with a few different organizations across the community, including United Way, the county, and People's Place in particular. So the first one is due, it's actually a letter of inquiry, and it's due the first week of June. So that'll be my first foray into partnering with a community group specifically for food banks. There will be some other possibilities that come up too, I think. So we'll continue to explore those.
And then also we have been spending a lot of time in the last couple of weeks on our business process reengineering and change management program. It's kind of a mouthful. And what that means is we are looking at every single process and paper movement, if you will, or communication for anything that we need to do for a grant project, we are analyzing that. This was part of our eCivis grants management software procurement that we did at the beginning of this, end of last year, the beginning of this year. And so what we're doing right now is we're re-engineering all of our business processes to be much more efficient. I think through we're doing this in collaboration across all of the departments that manage grants or have any grant funding. And so what we're aiming for is to make all of those business processes much more efficient, and they will be implemented through the eCivis software program. And for this, I think it will mean very significant time savings for people who are involved in grants, and also reduce a lot of headaches for all of the offices involved, including the comptroller's office, my office, engineering, parks, any office that's involved with a grant. So I think we have a consultant who has been leading us through this process. She's really wonderful, and it's been enlightening for me so far. So we'll keep you updated on that, and soon we'll have the eCivis software up and running, and I think we'll be working a little more efficiently. Another thing that we have been doing is developing the engagekingston.com website, and this was something that we procured early on in the year. It was sort of before COVID. We had procured it so that we would be able to share about our projects and get input on design projects and have sort of a one-stop shop for all of our grant funded projects, and honestly other departments can use it for projects that are not grant funded, for which they're looking for public input. And the site has a lot of opportunities for engagement, and right now we have one survey up there. We'll actually have two surveys up there, one which is for the climate adaptive design beach project. We also have a survey on the Uptown Transportation Project that's funded through the DRI. But there are lots of tools that you will probably see us use on this site in the future. And we may use it for virtual public meetings. It's become increasingly relevant during these times with COVID to be able to communicate about our design projects. And originally we just procured it so that we could communicate better about our design projects. And now I think it's become even more relevant. And that was funded mostly through grants as part of the expense to communicate about grants projects. And then the other priority, which is kind of always a priority for us, is ongoing project management. And that's reflected in the update. You can see all of the different projects that we're tracking on and making happen. So some highlights from the the grants activity update, and I'll pull that up after I'm finished with this PowerPoint. But we actually have 65 active projects. I added the 3 police department projects just before this meeting. We have a total project cost just over 58 million in grant funds that are totaling 42.5 million. There's a few projects in the list of the 65 projects that are really actually complete, but they're just not off the books yet because we have some final tasks and final reporting to do, and I don't pull them down off that list until they're absolutely completely finished and nothing is flowing through the comptroller's office anymore for those projects. 7 projects were moved recently to the completed list, which is at the bottom, and I'll show that in a minute. And so we have about $3 million of projects that were completed. And then just some project updates. You know, as I think many of you know, the Kingston Point Rail Trail was built last year. The grants for that project are being closed out. The largest transportation project in the city's history broke ground on Broadway in March. Also phase 1 construction of the first DRI project is underway at the Andretta Pool. And that will likely be finished by May 22nd. So that's all I had to share about the PowerPoint. Let me, I just also wanted to show really quickly, this is the Engage Kingston website that I was telling you about. So anybody who engages on this does need to register. If you go on each project that we share about, we'll have a tab like this, and you can click in and you can go down here. There's survey, you can take a survey, and there are lots of other kinds of tools that we can use. You can see what I really like is I feel like this will help us put a face on projects, and people will get to know who the project managers are. So you can see that myself, Ruth Ann, and Susan Blickstein, who is one of our consultants on the project, are listening. So if you put in a comment or ask a question, those are the 3 people who are gonna, you know, hear your question and work on answering it. So let me just move here to the next thing. So this is the project update that I shared via email. It's very small on the screen. I'm not sure if it's better, Andrea, if folks just want to ask a question, you can just tell me what, I think everyone got the email with either the Excel sheet or the PDF, and you can just ask me a question about a project and you just tell me the project number and I can share more about it.
If anybody has a question, Doug, I don't know if you could see everybody or if you want me to scroll through and watch for raised hands. Doug, can you see everybody?
Yeah. No, we can't see everybody, but if anybody has a question, please just unmute yourself and start talking. I don't think we'll talk over each other.
All right, and I could also see people too.
We received this last night. I had an opportunity to go through the whole thing. It's very, very detailed and comprehensive, and it ties very well with what Kristen just, you know, the summation of the total projects and the numbers, so forth. But, you know, any questions on this, unless they're major, we're really getting into the micro of this, and you know, that might be best handled on a one-to-one basis with either Ruth Ann or Kristen, unless if anybody does have a question.
I do have a question. This is Andrea Schott. For the obviously some of these are in different stages. Some of these are completely grant funded, but the ones that are not completely grant funded and that have not entered into an engineering study or that phase of it, is your department or is the mayor's office considering freezing some of these and not moving forward with some of these that they have a match of some sort that can actually be paused? And what is your office doing to research that?
Well, I think that this putting together this document is part of that research. I think that we will be having discussions going forward in the next couple of weeks about if there are any projects that we can slow down. A lot of our projects have a they have a 5-year grant period, and sometimes get slowed down for other reasons that are not COVID related. Design can sometimes go slower than we anticipated. So I think that we will be looking at if there's any projects that we need to slow down, and analyzing, which ones would not be good to slow down because either the grant period is coming to an end. It's also a conversation with our funders. There are a lot of grants that we might be able to extend the contract. So as you can imagine, it's an immense amount of information to go through, and just putting together this document is a big effort for my office and all of the project managers that are involved. So equally trying to figure out the decisions on each project it'll have to be a conversation between the comptroller, the mayor, the project manager, and the state agency or the funding agency. So that's essentially where we're at.
Thank you.
Tony Davis here.
Go ahead, Tony.
First, I want to say, Kristen, thank you for this spreadsheet, and it's very detailed. But again, it's something that gives us a lot more information in regard to these projects. I would just second what all the women at large Shout stated. If you guys are going to go and look at these projects and see, especially the ones that we have to have matching funds for, and that it is, and taking a look, it is looked at and carefully to see if this is a project that we would be able to pull it off as long as possible. I know you said that's going to be, very detailed, and that if we could put that in motion, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
One thing I also just want to mention is that this really is a draft. I'm noticing a typo as I look at it myself, and it's just so much information. So if you have any feedback or you notice anything, normally what I do is I'll bring this to the council meeting. I don't like to generally share it with the public until I've had all of your feedback, and then I can incorporate that and make sure that the information that I'm putting out there is as accurate as possible. So if you do have any comments or questions, feel free to email me. We'll probably continue to work on this over the next week or so, and then I'll ultimately put it up on my website, on the Growing Kingston. If you go to the top of the city website, or if you just look for the Grants Management Office, that's where it will be housed.
Okay, thank you, Kristen. With that, I would suggest that, as we move forward into phase 2 and maybe phase 3 of the economic impact plan, if there's any savings that can be realized by not putting up grant funding matches, I think that's detail that I think the mayor, the controller, and Kristen Wilson will analyze and come back to us on to see what can, but I think at this point, we just don't know. But there may be opportunities that can be realized for savings by not putting up the match at this point in time, deferring matches without endangering the project. But I think as time goes on, we'll have we'll just have to look at that as things come up. Any other questions on? Okay, Andrew, can you take this down, the screen share down, and we can move on?
I cannot, but Kristen can. If you just.
Oh, okay. Whoever can.
How do I stop that?
There you go.
There we go.
Okay. Thank you. Let's move on to the third item. And John, are you still with us? This relates to payments by the state Department of Transportation on Wirt Street and the Empire State Trail. Payments of $3,000 for an easement at the construction easement at Wirt Street, and $650 for an easement a temporary construction easement on the Empire State Trail. John, do you have any comments on this? It
I
looks
can just-
looks like it's
yeah.
something that's of no cost to the city.
Hi, it's
Go ahead.
it's John Schulteis. Yeah.
Recognize John Schulteis.
Yeah, hi, it's John Schulteis. Yeah, these are just two cases where the city is the landowner and would be granting an easement to the DOT. Both of these are temporary construction easements that will expire at the end of each construction project. And in the case of the Wirt Street Bridge, there's also a shed that the city is going to move out of the easement area, and the DOT will reimburse that cost.
Chairman Coop recognizes Rennie Scott Childress.
Yeah, John, is there any way to buck up those prices that they're going to pay us to say around $800,000?
Wouldn't that be fun? No, they give you what they do an appraisal, and this is the fair market value.
All right, thanks.
Doug Coop recognizes Alderman Shabbat. Go ahead, Steve.
Did you say me, Doug? I thought you said Short. Okay, this is
No, I'm
actually
sorry.
this is for
Alderman
John.
Shabbat.
Shabbat, close enough. John, does the state have any kind of timeline on the work? They seem to stop and start, and it's kind of.
I can give you in the case of the Wirt Street Bridge. I have heard that bid opening is happening. I want to say early June or late May, and the contractor could be mobilized as soon as early July. But in reality, if there's any delay, it'll be later than that.
I'm sorry, John. I kind of lost you there for a second. I caught the last two words of your of what you said.
We think the Wirt Street Bridge project will start in the summer, probably July to August timeframe.
Okay, other
Okay.
questions, comments?
Thank you.
Okay, we have two resolutions from engineering. I'll proceed with the first one. First resolution is to authorize the mayor to sign the agreement with the New York State Department of Transportation for DOT acquisition of a temporary easement for the Wirt Street Bridge project and to move a shed out of the easement area. The DOT will reimburse the city's moving expenses. So the estimated financial impact is a positive $3,050 to be paid to the city. I see Alderman Shabbat is making a motion, and Alderman Davis seconds. Okay, all in favor, please signify with your thumbs. 1, 2, 3, 4. All opposed is 0. So the motion passes 5-0. The other resolution, also from engineering, is to authorize the mayor to sign the agreements with the New York State Department of Transportation for DOT acquisition of a temporary easement for the Empire State Trail project. The estimated financial impact is a positive $650 to be paid to the city. Motion by Alderman Davis, second by Alderman Shabbat. All in favor? 1, 2, I think 1, 2, 3, all in favor, 5-0, no opposition. Okay, the motion passes. Okay, thank you, John. Moving on in the agenda, we have the standard workday resolution, which I think involves New York State Retirement Fund and specifically Alden Davis. I don't know who wants to comment on this, John Toohey or Tony Davis. Tony, I recognize you.
I really
you
don't
have
have time. I mean, is this, again, is this this procedure that has to be done in order for to, I guess, be part of these hours, be able to be calculated into my retirement system. And so it's just something I've been doing, and so it's just paperwork. Just paperwork.
Okay, well, thank you for all the detailed paperwork you submitted for this discussion. I recognize City Clerk Elisa Tinty.
Yeah, so this actually goes through my office. It's just like Tony said, this is required. The state just wants to know that the aldermen are working a certain amount of hours. So they have to submit a 3-month calendar that just logs their time. So it's every year we have to submit this.
Doug Coop again. Lisa, is there any action that we need to take right now on this?
You have to pass it committee. It is an actual resolution that has to get posted and for the public, and it has to get sent to the state. It's part of their reporting.
Let's see, do we have a copy of that resolution?
I thought it was sent to you.
It's in there.
It is. I don't seem to have it, but
I just wanted to also mention that.
Elisa, could you please,
Close it up.
if you have the resolution, Lisa, could you please read it? We could vote on it. I don't have a copy of it for some reason.
Tony, can you read it? I don't have it.
Who has it?
Hold on. Hold on.
No, nobody has this?
It was submitted. Hold on a second.
Hold on, Doug. Hold on.
Okay.
Do it. Nope.
You can't see it, Tony?
I can't see it anymore. Hold on one second. I'm just trying to get it on the website here. You want to come back to it and I'll go get it? I'll find it. Can you come back to this?
Okay, yeah, we'll move on and perhaps we'll come back to thank you. Let's move on to the 5th item, which is the Forsyth Park grant. These are budget transfers funded by the Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation for the grant. There are a budgetary transfer of a New York State grant of $22,434.32 to complete the tennis court parking lot and the 3 other small Forsyth Park parking areas. So it's a transfer from the grant to contracted services. The financial impact to the city is 0. Julie, do you have any comments on this?
Sure. This project started back in 2014 when we did Kinderland, and also the pavilion was redone in Forsyth Park. And this is to round out the final monies that are available through the grant. The full monies would be spent to pave that tennis lot, and 2 additional currently unimproved lots in Forsyth Park would be finalized and paved over by Callanan. This would close that grant out, and it would let us close out this OPRHP grant and avail us to future grants through them. They have limitations on how many grants we can apply to and have open at a given time. So it would be great for us to close this out. And it's fully reimbursable, so we would spend the money and get fully reimbursed with 0 financial impact.
Okay, thank you. Chair recognizes Alderman Scott Childers.
Yeah, I would just like to clarify with any folks who are listening, for any folks who are listening, this is another example of what Kristen was talking about, right? Where the grant determines exactly what we can use the money for. We can't shift this to something else, right?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Recognize Kristen Wilson, please.
I just also wanted to mention that the city has already met all of our match for this project. And so this is fully grant funded. There's no match required for the last $22,000.
Okay, let me read this before you make the motion, Steve. And unless there are any other questions, I'll read the resolution. The resolution, this is actually from Lindsay Timbrook from Parks and Recreation, to transfer funds in the amount of $22,434.32 in the 2020 Parks and Recreation budget to pay contractors to perform services to complete the tennis court parking lot and 3 other Forsyth Park parking areas as part of the OPRHP funded Forsyth Park grant project for $304,354. Is there a motion? Motion by Alderman Scott Childers, second by Alderman Shabbat. All in favor? Please signify. 1, 2, 3, 5. Is there anyone opposed? No. Passes 5-0.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Julie.
Okay, bye.
Okay, moving on to the 6th item relates to roof repairs at the Rondout Neighborhood Center, also from the Director of Recreation, Lindsay Timbrook. This is the transfer $1,300 from CDBG reimbursement to contracted services for improvements to the Rondout Neighborhood Center, replacement of the lower roof and HVAC units. Again, the funding for the improvements reimbursed by CDBG and taken off on Randy Scott Childers' comment. These are funds that cannot be diverted for some other purpose. Any questions, comments? Okay, is there a motion? A motion by Alderman Shabbat, second by Alderman Scott Childers. All in favor? 1, 2, 3, 5-0. Opposed? No. Motion passes. The only thing left here, if Elisa has not come back, so when she does come, yeah, okay. On the retirement fund business for Alderman Davis, yeah. I recognize you, Elisa. You're muted. Elisa, you're muted.
Sorry about that. So
That's
the
better.
committee report reads, adopting the standard workday calendar for the year 2020 for the New York State retirement system.
Questions, comments? Yes, Alderman Davis.
Kevin Bryan here still. I think I'm not sure. Do I have to recuse myself because this relates to me, right? I cannot vote on it.
Kevin? Well, I'll text him. He is here. Let me just get his attention.
I would believe that I would have to.
I would think so.
I would think you're right, Tony.
I wouldn't want any of the listeners to think that I was doing something, perfectly illegal.
Right.
I'm going to give him a call right now. He's on here still, but maybe caught up. So just give me a second, please.
I believe I would have to, so I would be recusing myself since this has to, deal with me.
Yeah.
deem and meet financially. That would be Alderman Tony Davis speaking right now.
Alderman Chabot?
Yeah, instead of waiting for Kevin, can we just vote? I don't anticipate we're going to need, an extra vote or anything. I think this will pass without Tony. He can just recuse himself.
Yeah, I think
That
we
is
should
correct.
accept
So, yeah.
his offer of recusing himself.
Yes.
Is there a motion on the resolution? Randy Scott Childress makes a motion, a second from Alderman Chabot. All in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4. And we have one recusement, so I guess it's a 4-to-1 vote. Is that right, Andrea?
Yes, a recusal of a
okay.
no vote, yeah.
Right. Okay, thank you.
So my sound was off because I was calling Kevin. Who made the motion on that? Just so I could do the committee reports? And who was the second?
I don't have it.
It's all right, they got it. I got it. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, I think that completes the business items of the agenda. I think we now move to the standard monthly finance update from Comptroller John Toohey. John, you want to proceed with this?
Sure, Doug. I emailed everyone when I say this morning, it was probably around noon time, some updated financial numbers for the COVID-19. It was also posted on the website. I think it would be prudent to go through that. It's probably the most important financial update I can give you right now.
Right.
As part of that, I gave you what I thought would be helpful, and I apologize. I'm looking at my sheets as I'm speaking here. One sheet is an estimated budgetary loss range and basically a snapshot of where our fund balance is now, the loss estimates from revenues, the expenditure reduction plan, what's been enacted so far, and how that impacts those losses, and then a projected unassigned fund balance at the end of 2020 under each of the scenarios. Does everyone have access, or have you seen that sheet?
Yes, I have it.
Doug, do you have it?
This you sent us this morning. I have it.
Okay. So just as of December 31st, 2019, our fund balance was just under $7.4 million. What we're recognizing with potential revenue impacts as of today, and I'll get into it in a second, but these numbers are literally changing day to day, week to week. We're estimating, or I'm estimating, loss estimates in terms of revenues from anywhere from $4 million to nearly $6.5 million for this year. We've currently enacted for the general fund $1,369,337 of cost reductions. Under each of these scenarios, it would bring the fund balance from anywhere from 2.3 million roughly to 4.8 million at the end of the year. And that would go from just over 16% of where it's at for 2019. It could bring it down to anywhere from just over 5% to just under 11%. Once again, I mean, these estimates are subject to a great degree of fluctuation. They depend a lot on what happens with our state funding, property tax collections for the rest of the year, and sales tax. Sales tax is, I sent you information on sales tax. We've received 2 checks from sales tax since the pandemic is at least covering that pandemic period. The first check was down 27%. This last check was down almost 38%. And it's difficult right now to get a firm trend on what that number is going to be. Clearly, it's extremely significant. My loss estimates provide for a range of 21 to 31% right now. That is increased from the last estimate I provided. If we find that the June 4th sales tax check is also down in that range, we may have to look at increasing our loss estimates even further. So I do caution you on that. On the snapshot, the financial analysis where I'm projecting the fund balance, so you're aware, on the low loss estimate, the sales tax reduction for the rest of the year would be 21%. The high loss estimate is 31%. Okay, that's assuming that where we're going to be isn't going to hold forever. You know, the economy's going to reopen. We're going to come back to some degree of normalcy. Obviously, there's a lot of factors involved there. I can't imagine that where we're at now is going to hold for the remainder of the year, but it could hold for clearly several months. That being said, high loss estimate 31%. The last two checks are 27 and 38. So we are trending towards the high loss estimate that I sent out as of right now, specifically regarding sales tax. And keep in mind with sales tax, the three largest industry types with sales tax are all heavily impacted. Automobile dealerships, vehicle, fuel, and restaurants. I don't think I have to go into too much detail. Everyone sees what's happening with those three industries. So the quickly all these industries rebound and our local industries rebound, our local businesses, the quicker the sales tax pick up. But it's a little more severe than what we originally projected. But once again, I think we need a few more checks to get a better handle on it. But certainly, you know, a 30% reduction is within the realm of possibility for the remainder of the year.
John, as on this estimated budgetary loss range and the spreadsheet you're just reading from, the expenditure reduction plan, you through these three scenarios, low loss, mid-range loss, and high loss, you've kept the expenditure reduction plan constant at $1,369,337, and really taken the hit, as it were, by going to the fund balance. In other words, absorb beyond this $1,369,000 to take the rest of the hit in the fund balance.
Yeah.
As we go into the more draconian scenarios and loss estimate, would we also look at more expenditure reduction plans? More expenditure reductions?
Well, Doug, it's John too again. To answer that question, the reason why I dropped those numbers in, these are the firm numbers that are in the adopted plan for the general fund only. I don't think this wasn't meant to represent what I think the plan should be. This is to represent essentially this is to represent if no further action is taken, what it could look like at the end of the year. Where could we? The mayor's plan, you know, he did present a plan with the phase 1, 2, and 3. You know, I think once again it's going to be some challenging decisions as we get further in the year, particularly if this high loss estimate continues to play itself out. There will be interesting decisions and tough decisions regarding, you know, where to cut costs. There'll be tough decisions regarding how much fund balance to use, how much fund balance could be left to even use for the prior year or the following year budget. You know, it's there's going to be some tough decisions ahead.
Okay, I understand.
Certainly in the high loss estimate, you know, with just over $2.3 million of fund balance, doesn't leave you a lot to appropriate for the following year budget. Now, what this doesn't account for is current year budget performance. So, you know, if all things being said and equal, if all the other lines in the budget are positive and, you know, the department's holding the line on spending, we could have some savings there. I don't think we should count on that, but, you know, that is a potential help. But clearly in all these scenarios, you know, I'm looking at a minimum of $2.5 million fund balance loss to anywhere to close to $5 million And that's,
Yeah.
once
Remind
again, I'll continue to update this as I get sales tax checks. I'll look at it, where does that put us in relation to my estimates? Do we need to update these estimates when other monies come in, when mortgage tax comes in, when parking revenue comes in? But the big drivers of this spreadsheet are state aid, sales tax, and property tax. And property tax was updated with collections through April 30th. So I know what was collected through the deadline, and we were $767,000 down year over year for current year tax. And
Another question, John.
We've had growth in delinquencies, which I wouldn't necessarily attribute to COVID, but we're up over $500,000 in back taxes. That's not on this spreadsheet.
Okay. These three scenarios take us from a fund balance of, 10.81% down to 5.14%. Remind me again, what are the guidelines that we usually try and hit?
Okay. So right. Our policy calls for a range of 10 to 13%. New York State GFOA recommends 5 to 15%. We're currently at over 16. From a cash flow standpoint, we start having difficulties under 10. That's where, and I'm just throwing a rough number out there because the fund balance, there's variables in there. It's not necessarily indicative of the exact cash that you have, but there's a correlation. But typically when we get around the 10% level is where we start looking at cash flow borrowings in the fall to get us through to the next tax cycle. Rennie has a question?
Yeah,
Rennie Scott Chilvis, please.
I'm just wondering if you can play that out a little bit more. What does that mean, a cash flow interruption?
What happens is, the government finance is a cyclical business. Typically, right now is where we are typically, we have our highest cash balances. We've just finished the tax collection cycle. The final tax installment is April 30th. And from this point on throughout the year, that cash balance goes down. We have a couple large, our retirement bill is due in December, and then it's also due again in February, but there's a large retirement bill due in December. So essentially from May 1st through the end of the year, and then into mid-January when the taxes start flowing in again, we're slowly depleting our cash balances. So even though you have fund balance, you don't necessarily have cash because you might have receivables that you haven't collected yet, et cetera. So from a cash standpoint, once that fund balance goes below a certain threshold, you don't have enough cash to get you through from one tax collection cycle to the next potentially. Sometimes in the past we've borrowed or we've gotten authority to borrow just to make sure we have enough. You don't want to run into a position where you can't pay payroll or pay vendors, but you get pretty close around that 10% threshold. Could it drop a touch below that and still be okay? Potentially, but you get below 10%, you have to consider cash flow issues. Obviously bond ratings and things like that, that's going to be, we're not in this alone. I don't think that should be the primary driver right now. Every municipality in New York State is going to be battling this. But, in this area where we are being hit particularly hard, and, obviously the financial impact is very significant. And, if the high loss estimate plays itself out with a fund balance of 5%, you're certainly in a precarious situation going forward. Hopefully there's some new legislation out there, right? I just got a notification today of legislation that was introduced for funding reimbursements for local government. Hopefully some of that plays itself out. Hopefully some of these losses don't pan out to the extent they do. But if they do, and our fund balance sits at that 2.3 million, it's going to be pretty tough, because then keep in mind, if the high loss estimate plays itself out and our fund balance drops $5 million, what does that mean? That means that all the revenues the revenues that are impacted were generally impacted throughout the year, that our sales tax didn't rebound very quickly. Perhaps state aid didn't rebound quickly. Property tax didn't rebound quickly, which then lends itself to, when you're looking at the following year budget, you may be looking at some significant reductions for those items, because at the time the budget's produced for 21, those revenues are still taking major hits. So certainly that the high loss estimate would present itself with a lot of challenges from a cash flow standpoint and a strategic planning standpoint going forward.
Okay, and then another question. This may actually be appropriate for the mayor or for Kristen Wilson, but we talked about the potential for reducing the workforce through furloughs. But what do these low numbers, what do these losses of revenue represent in terms of the follow through with services? So things like paving the streets or picking up garbage and recycling.
What do these loss estimates?
Yeah, because I mean, I get that we might have to reduce the workforce, but does that mean that, so my understanding, for example, is that a fair amount of the money we use for paving the streets comes through Marchicelli grants, through other state and federal aid. I mean, is there anything in the budget that would reduce those sorts of, those parts of what we spend?
Well, as of right now, the CHIPS money is what we primarily use for paving. That's not part of the operating budget, so that's secure as of right now. Certainly, if the high loss estimate provides, comes to fruition, there's going to be a lot of tough decisions. I mean, the mayor's letter, where he introduces the economic impact plan, I think states that. Certainly, you can't take a hit of $6.5 million in revenue and continue as if it didn't happen, right? I would expect with the $6.5 million revenue loss, programs and services would be impacted without question. I don't think there's a way to avoid that. You're talking a catastrophic level of loss if it gets to that point. And then there will be tough decisions. What do we continue with? What do we not continue with? We're not there yet, but those will, I'm sure, the council will have input. The mayor, will work on that, but that's the draconian level if you get there.
Okay. We'll have to deal with it as we get closer and closer to it, if in fact that happens. Other questions or comments? I think then we've completed all the business. If there are no other items, is there a motion for adjournment? Rennie Scott Childress motions for adjournment, and Steve Chabot second. All in favor? Tony, he's left. All in favor of adjourning? I see 4. Tony, okay, it's 5-0. All opposed? None. Okay. We are adjourned. Thank you all very much. And Andrea, thank you for setting up the meeting and
Good night.
I'll follow up with thank you, Doug. I'll follow up with committee reports as soon as I get them through the system. All right, so just
thank you, John, for all the work you're doing. We know this is crazy.
Nice beer, John.
It's very stressful.
Yeah, John, just keep us up to date as soon as anything changes.
I will, and I wanted to, this sheet that I sent out, I did today based upon a sales tax estimate. I wanted to give you a visual so you could see, we talk about fund balance and losses and how does that play into the fund balance. I know myself, I'm a visual person. If you see it, it'll make a little more sense, but I'll continue to give you whatever information I can. The next sales tax check is June 4th, and that should be a that's gonna be a telltale sign of where we're going.
Great.
Okay. Oh, and I should mention, in that email, so you'll have it, there's a sales tax calendar. Take a look at that. I sent a sales tax calendar out. I'll actually tell you, it'll tell you what, for when I get a sales tax check, what period is it for, what filers it's for, and what filers, monthly, quarterly, annual, and then also if they're electronic or non-electronic. And in my email to you, I explained that the largest filers are electronic monthly filers. So, all right.
Okay.
But if you have any questions on anything, give me a call.
Take care.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Thanks, John.
Okay, we stand adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.